with the whole model and the setup. So we all kind of are excited, that you do that with us together. And the idea is that each time an exciting, interesting guest we can talk to and ask questions. And it's my great pleasure, Shewki, the co-founder and CEO of LIV, here with me, AJ. And a big applause, everyone.
Yeah.
Yes, wonderful. Give us another one. Great to have you here. So you are.
You guys are doing great. I'm so proud.
Wonderful. So interesting platform coming from the gaming industry, and AJ, you will talk about it in a moment. Physically, you are located, I think, in Prague, in the wonderful. Is that right?
Prague, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. A beautiful city, and obviously with these VR spaces, it's so easy to connect across borders, even with closed borders. We are all together here, which I think is really, really nice. So welcome again, and what I'd like to start with, maybe you can give a little bit background about yourself, and then what LIV is doing. What I'll do in the parallel, I mute here the audience for now, but you have the opportunity to ask questions later on. So that we focus on the conversation here with AJ, and then later on you can ask questions.
And feel free to ask any question.
Okay, AJ, tell us a little bit about your background, and then obviously what LIV does.
Yeah, I'll start a little bit about what LIV does. You may have all potentially seen some of our work. If you've ever seen a real person inside of VR, usually playing Beat Saber, filmed with a real camera, then that's LIV Technologies. So we build VR live streaming technology. We help people who create content on YouTube, Twitch, but also hobbyists like yourself maybe, film themselves inside of VR, both filming themselves as real people, but also filming themselves as their favorite avatars. So you could look like you kind of look like inside Altspace today, or you could look like a fridge, or like anything you want really, and capture yourself inside your favorite games. We are in over 400 experiences today, including some of the bigger games on Steam, but also the bigger games that people stream today. And if any one of you want a demo or want to see what this looks like, you can always PM me afterwards. We can chat a little bit afterwards, and I can show you some stuff. It's pretty cool. I'm getting a bunch of people adding me. I'm gonna sort of accept you guys as we go along. A little bit more about myself. So I'm from Sweden originally. I'm born and raised in Stockholm, Sweden. I actually speak German too, so if you try and talk shit about me in German behind my back, I will understand. I left school when I was 18, did a bachelor's in the UK, and then moved to San Francisco for a master's or an MBA, and then started my first company in the fitness space. And I've been sort of on the startup path ever since. We started LIV in 2016. Back then it was a hobby project. We just wanted to film ourselves playing VR. And we realized really quickly that there are no tools to film yourself playing VR. And so really we started building these tools for ourselves, and that's just snowballed into what we see today, which is this live streaming platform.
Wonderful, AJ. So thanks so much. I think one of the questions I'd like to start with is I think when we look at the whole VR space, then clearly gaming is ahead of almost everything else. So it's kind of in most other areas, people actually haven't used one of these glasses yet. So there's still a lot of people, but I think in the gaming space it's more like, well, which one is the best one and which is the relevant one? So my first question then around that, from your learnings and what you see in the gaming space, and for the new guests, please mute yourself. Okay, we'll figure that out for the next time. Now we have kind of more crowd here. Welcome everyone. So let's talk about the gaming industry and what you learned from there in VR space and what other areas you can learn from.
Yeah, so it's a pretty broad question, right? I think in general, the reason we see so much gaming and so little other stuff in VR right now is because it is, after all, an immersive medium. It lends itself really well for particular immersive experiences, gaming and sort of movies in general. And that's a little bit distracting, actually, but we'll figure that out. So it lends itself really well for immersive experiences, and in a sense, the promise of VR was always the promise of the next level of gaming. Anything from what we saw in sci-fi 10, 20, 30 years ago, all the way down to how it was marketed early on with the DK1 and the Oculus Rift, the Kickstarter. So I think it's a natural progression. People have sort of dreamt about this for a while, and they're now seeing their childhood dreams come to fruition. Having said that, there are a few other areas that are really compelling right now in VR, particularly in the training and simulation space. So there's a few companies out there that are building a suite of tools to help businesses better train and onboard their employees. And there's a few examples of this that we can go into if you're interested. But largely, I think what we're seeing is you got to sort of fit your product to the timeline of VR. In other words, VR is very immature still in that sense, and gaming is a great gaming and porn actually is a great place where you can sort of take immature technologies and still play around and give people some value. But if you're trying to sell this as a thing that your mother and my dad will use, then it's a lot more utilitarian value and a lot more sort of it needs to live more in their zeitgeist, so to say, and it doesn't quite today.
No, absolutely. So would you compare that then with the situation of the internet in around 93, 94, 95? In that space where VR stands today?
So 95, I mean, I was born 89, so I was pretty young. I didn't get my first computer until 2001 and internet until 2002, 2003. However, there are some parallels, and I think the parallels that I can draw is from back when internet cafes were really popular. So growing up in Sweden, and I'm sure in Germany it's the same thing, internet cafes were the thing that sort of the kids who wanted to play games would go and do. And it was largely for two reasons. One is we didn't have good enough internet at home, and we didn't have good enough hardware at home to actually play the game that we wanted to play. And I see similarities in VR there today, where if you want to buy what I have, a Valve Index, you need both a $1,000 headset and you need a powerful PC to run the experience. And so there's an opportunity for arcades today to sort of fill that gap, or that stopgap, really. Long term, though, I don't think VR arcades are going to stick around. I think they're going to suffer the same fate that internet arcades, or internet cafes rather, had back in sort of late 2000s.
So I think it's a great comparison. It's interesting when we see now kind of these online and virtual events, conferences and summits and so on without VR. One of the biggest challenges also of webinars is that you get distracted, and you do other things. You read your email and you do other things. Where here, I think everybody is really immersed in here, and is connected to that. So is that something you see kind of can make that difference, that people actually see a lot of value in these kind of meetings versus a Zoom conversation?
That's a good question. I think it's hard to predict, right? Like, we don't really know. So a lot of what we're going to say now is sort of gut feel / our own experiences. Sure. I think for one, distractions come in different forms here. So in Zoom, your distraction is your other tabs. Here, the distraction is a guy coming and patting you on the face like this, or going behind the screen, or leaving their mic unmuted. So there's a different set of problems that we have to deal with, including personal comfort, for what it's worth. There's a lot of people who get uncomfortable when I get this close, like that. And I felt that myself. The first time I jumped into VR, someone came and tapped me on the head. That felt really visceral.
Yes.
So the different set of problems. I do think, however, being able to use your virtual limbs and interact with a virtual body just makes it more memorable. And the real question is, will we get desensitized to this over time? So just like getting on, the first time we ever saw a live stream, that was sort of a transformative experience back in 2006. Are we going, and now I can watch live stream every day and it doesn't faze me. Are we going to feel the same way about VR? And chances are the answer is yes, right? Like, as humans, we sort of tend to get used to our environments, and this will be very, very normal very soon, and we won't feel as novel about it as we do today.
Absolutely, I would agree. But at the same time, then the question in his last talks about these migrations from the real world into the virtual world, where we are in a different environment, as you said, until we take off kind of the headset again. So is there a risk then, and again, I know it's more speculation, but kind of from what you're seeing right now, that people spend too much time in these environments?
That reminds me of my mom. She used to always say, don't sit too close to the screen, or don't spend too much time on the computer, because it's not good for you. And if only she had known that I'm going to have a screen on my face now. But it's a really good question, right? Like, what is too much time in VR? We don't know. We have this theory at LIV. We talk a lot about this, but we think VR is going to be used in the mental health field. I think VR is going to have a lot of uses over time. But I also think we're going to see the advent of new mental health illnesses and sort of mental health, let's call them quirks, that maybe come up from exposure or extended exposure in VR. So it's really hard to see or know what's going to happen there. And I almost tend to not want to make any predictions there because it is such an open field that I might just say something wrong and people it's the internet. No one forgets what's said on the internet. It's because 5 years from now, someone's going to come and ping me and say, you said this, you were wrong. So I would hold
I'm just casually recording this, AJ.
Yes,
Please
exactly.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So it's recorded. It's kind of everywhere now. No, that makes total sense. And I think we learn as we go, as we have to with even our smartphones, how to deal with those smartphones where you have then challenges and so on. No, thanks. Thank you. I think that we'll see how we go with that.
That's a great point. So smartphone. One of the things we suffer at LIV is we have a ginormous influx of notifications every day because our community lives on Discord where we also run a company. So that red notification is up front and center in our lives. And it is actually a huge distraction. We have to consciously disconnect in order to be productive in the day. And so the question is, what does that red notification mark look like in VR? And how intrusive will it be? And what does ad block look like in VR? And will I be able to disable an ad, or will I have to watch an ad in order to continue in my experience? So there's a lot of sort of cascading questions that come up once you draw parallels from the mobile and 2D world. That will be really interesting as we look forward and try and solve them.
Absolutely. I mean, the question is then, do we have a plane outside here on the sky, for example, and we have this beautiful sky, and when you think about kind of the real world, you have these planes with the ad attached to it, flying across the sky. So we could do Google could start something like that maybe here as well. I think that will be really interesting to see, and we'll see how we go also with along with the VR cast. What I'd like to do now is switch a little bit the topic back to LIV, because there's one other element which may be interesting for our group here, for the audience, because you mentioned that briefly, you have your teams spread across the world. So you don't have kind of a head office or something like that. Maybe you can talk a little bit about this distributed management of teams, and what is your experience? What are some of the challenges? What works well? And obviously now in the current situation, I mean, you said business as usual, but maybe that's of interest, not only out of the current situation, but in general terms.
Yeah, this is a ginormous topic. We could talk about this for hours.
Of course.
So where do we start? So we're a team of 19. We are 16 engineers and 3 non-engineers, let's call them, just to bucket ourselves into the right field here. And we're all over the world. We're everywhere from Australia to the US to Europe. So we're across 3 to 4 time zones, which means that in order for us to be effective, we actually need to rethink what asynchronous work looks like. So we use Discord, much like Slack, with a sort of a gamer interface to it. And that helps a lot because we can leave a message and people can wake up and they can deal with it. But I think the reality is, if you are distributed, you're going to move a little bit slower, because there's a bit of time shift to a lot of the things that you do. And so the question is, in our case at least, and we can only talk about LIV here, is the sacrifice of moving slightly slower as a startup worth the benefits that we get from being remote? And so the question is, what are our benefits? Well, for one, we can hire people who would not be able to move to where we are. That's actually the biggest boon ever. So we've hired people who are traditionally super senior and super experienced that we would not be able to hire if we didn't offer them complete remote work, where they can stay in Australia in this case, for example, or stay on the West Coast and still engage and build something they're really passionate about. So that's a big boon for us. It's especially important because we can't pay Google salaries. So how do we entice people to come work at LIV in addition to building cool product? And a lot of that is autonomy and sort of that remote work experience. The other benefit that we get from remote work is we get to kind of structure our work the way we want to. This kind of ties into the benefits of remote work in general, but it's worth highlighting. What we found is everyone works differently if they want to be productive. The office environment isn't the best environment for everyone. And while there are people who struggle with remote work, there are also people who thrive in remote work. So a lot of the things we do is we, up front and center, mention that these jobs are all remote, and it sort of becomes a self-selecting filter for the people who are looking for those opportunities. In fact, we know this is the case because when people apply to us, they'll often tell us, hey, I've been looking for a job for so long to switch away from what I'm doing right now, and I just haven't found a company that holistically offers remote work the way you do, and that's why I'm here talking to you. So we sell to applicants the way they sell to us, and that's sort of the relationship that we have with people working at LIV.
Very nice. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. I think there's some really valuable insights, especially in brain work, in creative work. How much do you see also kind of ties in this idea that you can only work actually creative in a creative way 4 hours, or you have to kind of spread that, and you have to kind of organize your day as with the flow, with your own personal flow. Is that a topic you discuss?
Yeah, it's hard, right? So I really like the work I do. So for me, I'm okay working from home and having my work and my life sort of intermingle. It also makes sense. I'm the founder and CEO, so for me, that's sort of part of the job. It's part of the job description. It becomes much harder if. So I lived with our CTO, for example, and now our CTO, even though he's in a similar position than me, he still really likes his own space and time outside of work, and so it becomes a bit of a challenging balancing act that you have to do with the people who work remotely. Which is, when are you on call? If you're always at home, do you have set work hours? Well, that doesn't quite work for us because we're remote. Yes. So we need some overlap, and so are you always on call? If yes, then you're always working. That's not a good solution. Do you have set work hours? That's also not a great solution for us because we're in so many different time zones. So really, I think the reality there is we just have to be kind of humane about it and be really mindful of the fact that people have their own lives, and extend that that expectation across the board, so that when we reach out to someone, we want something to happen, we know that inherently this person is 11 hours ahead. They might be sleeping, or they might be with their family, and letting that take a little bit longer time than just going up to someone in the office, tapping them on the shoulder and saying, hey, can I borrow you 5 minutes? And that's that time shift that we talk about, that things will just take a little bit longer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's going to develop over time. Do you see, with a team, 20 people or so on, that's still a relatively small team. How do you see this scale that up in terms of the trust level? Because I think trust plays a key role in the whole equation.
Yeah, trust is critical. And I think as of late, we're seeing more and more people talk about the trust and performance framework. So what is really important for leaders in an organization. The way we build trust is by running what we call a radically transparent organization. At least that's one of the ways we build trust. And the other way is we tend to take a very human approach to people. So we spend a lot of time thinking about, give me 1 sec, let me tell the people in the back here in my office to be a little bit quiet. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So what we do with radically transparent, we should point that in as a separate point of conversation, because transparent organizations are a rather new thing, and there are some challenges and some benefits there too. But when I say we treat people like people, we spend a lot of time and money on figuring out what people need to be the best version of themselves, and then we get out of the way. In other words, I say this all the time, and people laugh when I say this. I am truly and utterly a janitor. That is my job. I make sure that people have what they need, and then I just get out of the way. And I think that's what a good leader should do, unless you want to be the product leader as well. So that's how we do it. Now, on radically transparent organizations, what we mean there is when we hire people, for example, we actually tell everyone exactly how much money everyone makes, how much equity everyone has, and then we have an open door policy where anyone can come to me or anyone else on the team and ask exactly anything that they want to ask, knowing that they'll be received without judgment, essentially, including things like mental health. So we have a mental health budget. You can expense your mental health anonymously if you want to go see a therapist. We take that really seriously, and we spend a lot of time talking about mental health and also expressing gratitude towards the team. And I think that scales really well. Now, At 100 people, we probably have to change things up. But the way we approach that is sort of, we cross that bridge when we get there. So far, so good.
Fantastic, AJ. Thank you so much so far. One last question, and then I open the floor to questions from the audience. So first off, yes, I think a big hands-on applause so far for everything. So, the last question I want to ask you: what's the one question, AJ? Nobody has asked you yet, but you think it should be asked.
This is such a hard question. Because you sent me this in an email. I was like, What's the question that no one has asked that they should ask? And it brings two problems, which is, I've been around for a while, so if no one has asked yet, it's probably a very, very rare question. And two, the word should, it's such a subjective word. Should according to who? And so maybe the real question, according to me, right? So it becomes hard, right? Like, I think one thing that is seldomly talked about that I realized at our first company is anything you do in life, you really have to be honest with yourself as to why you're doing it. I'll give an anecdote before I tie this back into LIV. So our first company was a marketplace for personal training. Our goal was to help people lead healthier lives by connecting them to the right trainer. Not just any trainer or the people you have at your gym, but the one who really understands your needs, who has the right experience and is within a close vicinity of you so that you can meet up often. And one of the ways we would sell it to customers is we would get on a call with them and we would talk to them about, what are your goals? Now that's a pretty simple question, Michael. If I ask you, what are your goals in terms of your training, very often we'll hear people say, actually, let me ask that. Do you do any type of sports?
Yeah, I run.
So what's the goal of running for you? Why do you run?
Feeling fit and healthy.
And that tends to be pretty much everyone's answer. Now, this might be your actual answer. And for someone who is running, that makes more sense than someone who goes to the gym. But what we found with people at our old company was when we asked people, why are you training? The 99 out of 100 answers were, I want to be healthy. But that is a rather cop-out answer, because what does I want to be healthy mean? And so the way we would dig into this is we would share our own experiences as to why we are training. So I'm very big into training myself. And the reason why I'm so obsessed with it is I used to be really skinny. And I used to be really self-conscious about how I looked. And so that, even though I didn't want to admit that to myself, it took me, the better part of a decade to really get to the bottom of it. It's something that was gnawing at the back of my head. And when we started sharing this story with our customers, what we would quickly find is they got more comfortable telling us exactly why it is they were training. And you would hear very different stories. You'd hear, I'm worried that my wife doesn't think I'm attractive anymore, or I'm really self-conscious about my skinny legs, or, I have this superfluous skin from when I lost a lot of weight. And that's the core, right? That's the thing you want to hear when you want to hear people's motivation. And so when it comes to entrepreneurship and anything in life that you want to do, if not to tell other people, you have to be radically honest with yourself about why you're doing the things you're doing. And even if that motivation is what you think other people will frown upon, that's okay. It's not other people's business to judge your motivation, as long as it is a real and authentic motivation for yourself.
Thank you, AJ. Thanks so much. Now, first question here, Dominic.
Hey AJ, thanks for the talk. First of all, I'm just moving over here so I can see the answers. Please raise your hands if you're home because of Corona.
Wow.
Okay, that's actually less. Oh no, that's more. There we go, more people. Okay, I'm just asking this because I wanted to mention that you're completely right about the beneficial effects of virtual reality when it comes to mental health. So I have been in quarantine for Corona 2 days only, and I'm already getting cabin fever. And Dan, my friend over here, the only one who's a robot, he told me that this is happening right now, and I jumped into it immediately. And not necessarily because I know what you're doing already. So this wasn't for me. I wasn't learning about your business because I know what you're doing and I love it. It was more about spending time and hanging out with a couple of people I know. So with AJ, with Dan, with a couple other people, does feel like you're all there. It does feel like I'm sharing this experience with Dan. So I'm actually very interested in the beneficial social mental health effects that virtual reality has in times of crisis like these.
Yeah, and that's kind of what my dad was going through as well, with wanting to feel closer to me and my brother, being countries apart. I mean, we can talk on the phone all we want, but there is something really intimate, and I think the key word for VR is always going to be intimate. There's something really intimate about sharing a space with someone, even if you guys look like you came out of Minecraft, right? That's just time. Like in 5 years, we'll have photorealistic avatars, and you can look like yourself if you want to look like yourself. So I completely agree, Dominic, and I think it's a great point.
Hi, Michael.
Sascha.
Siehst du mich?
Hey.
Hier.
Ja. Sascha.
Hey. Hi, Michael. Okay, AJ, I'm interested in exactly what you say. So I'm looking for spaces where I can experience learning in a different way. Do you have any recommendations where there are, great examples of having a good time while learning? Always like this here, avatars standing around, somebody's talking, and some boring slideshow. Is there anything better?
Yeah, I love that question, because what you're saying is we're mimicking reality here. Meetings tend to be really boring in reality too.
Yeah.
And I think utility spaces like this suffer the same fate that games suffered 2-3 years ago, which is they're not very creative.
Yeah.
When people started making games in VR, 3, 4, 5 years ago, you can kind of take a look at them today, and there wasn't really, for a lot of these games, there wasn't anything really groundbreaking that leverages the fact that we're in a completely sixed-off space, and that we can move in that sixed-off space. So the real question is, is it only because these utility spaces are early, or is it because you see these utility spaces are supposed to be utility spaces? They're not supposed to be a playground and a learning space. Now, we won't know until someone creates that experience that sort of fulfills both, and chances are it'll live inside something like Neos VR or VR Chat or any of the more programmable social spaces, where you have essentially access to game engine level technology, and you can create a space that's primarily a utility space like this business club, but then has elements of participation or play built in. So it's more of a creative function than the technology.
A little bit, because last Friday we tried about 8 VR platforms as an alternative for Laval Virtual, and the main conclusion was actually that there is not one platform that is fitting all needs. So one-to-one meetings, event meetings, presentations, some socializing, some one-to-one socializing, some group socializing, and some play. It's just not there yet, and almost all platforms are overloaded with more than 20, 30, 40 people. That's also still very big, much of a limitation, and that's also why alt space is at the moment so popular. It's actually, from most platforms, the most stable one with large groups of people. Apart from, we very much forward to the HTC one, the Shanghai virtual meeting on Engage, which is happening in a couple of days. Google that. There are also a lot of people will be expected, but because it's so early stage, I think it's really, most VR spaces are a bit like this, apart from VR Chat, where it's more like Second Life with a lot of wild sex avatars going on, and it's like a bit more creative.
Well, I have to go there.
Yes.
As a sexy robot or what?
Well, I'm actually a girl in VR Chat, because you can do anything you want.
Okay.
But actually, so the conclusion is no recommendation, just try them all. It's all wildly different, but all very early stage.
Yes. I think we're all in the early learning stage there. Excellent. Other questions? Thank you. Thanks, Sascha. Thank you. Other questions? No?
We got one over there. Lady in blue.
Yep.
Okay. I want to know if you have a space to use VR for deaf people.
Use VR for deaf people? That's a great question. I'm unfortunately not qualified to answer anything more than just as a guy who spends a lot of time in VR. I think, yeah, it's hard. I mean, you kind of get, you can get a lot of the experience just from being in here and sixed off without hearing anything. So you're not excluded the way maybe a blind person is, particularly because as a blind person you can't also use Braille.
AJ, thank you so much for being here. How can people reach you?
Michael, let's do one thing.
Yeah, of course.
Everyone stand in front of this screen in a nice little group. Let's take a picture together.
Yeah, that's a good idea.